By the time the fever finally let go of Isabel Roark, it had already taken more than her life. It had taken the sound of her little boy's voice. Jesse Roark was 6 years old the autumn his mother died, and from the day they lowered her beneath the live oaks, he did not speak another word. The Roark Ranch had good water, fat cattle, and a fine stone house above the creek. It had everything but a reason to rise in the morning. But that October a stranger would walk up the ranch road with a child on her hip and nothing to her name, and before the first frost she would give that silent boy back his voice. Welcome to Front Porch Tales. If this story touches your heart, subscribe and tell us in the comments where in the world you are watching from tonight. Adeline Shaw buried her husband in the spring and lost everything else by the fall. Thomas had been a good man and a poor one, and when the coughing sickness took him, it left Adeline with a rented room she could not pay for, a little girl named Lucy, and a valise that held everything the two of them still owned in the world. The landlord gave her until the end of the month. The month ended, so she walked. She walked out of the flat country and up into the hill country, where the land folded green and gold, and the live oaks stood in the pastures like patient old men. And she stopped in every town and knocked on every decent door, and she asked for honest work of any kind. Washing, cooking, mending, anything. The town of Cypress Bend was the last one before the hills got too rough for a woman on foot. And in Cypress Bend, on a bright cold morning outside the general store, Adeline Shaw met Gideon Marsh. Marsh was the biggest man in that country. In every way a man can be big. He owned the store's mortgage and the freight line and half the good bottomland, and when he spoke, the town arranged its face to agree with him. He looked at Adeline's worn dress and her tired child, and he did not lower his voice at all. "We don't hire drifters," he said, "and I'd take it kindly if the rest of you didn't either." He said it to the whole porch, to the whole town. A woman with no husband and no people is a woman with a story she's not telling. Cypress Bend looks after its own. You're not ours. A woman by the water barrel looked away. The storekeeper found something to do with his hands. Nobody said a word for her. Adeline stood very straight, and she took Lucy's hand, and she thanked Mr. Marsh for his time, because her mother had raised her to be gracious even to men who did not deserve it, and then she walked back out to the road. It was getting on toward dark. The wind off the hills had teeth in it, and far up a long private road, past a gate with a wrought iron R, a single lamp was burning in a window. Adeline looked at that light a long time. Then she picked Lucy up, because the little girl's legs had given out, and she started up the road toward the last house in the county that had not yet turned her away. The Roark place rose out of the dusk like something from an old story. There was a stone house with a deep gallery porch, and a good barn, and a windmill turning slow over a stock tank, and a creek she could hear, but not see, running clear and cold somewhere in the dark. And over all of it lay a stillness that was not peace. It was the stillness of a place where something had stopped. The yard was untended. A gate hung open on one hinge. The corral rails wanted mending. It was a rich man's ranch being run by a man who had quit caring, and Adeline knew that kind of quiet, because she had lived inside it herself since the spring. She knocked. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then the door opened, and a man stood there with a lamp in his hand, and Adeline understood at once that she had come to a house as broken as she was. Nathaniel Roark was not old, but grief had put years on him. He was tall and worn down, unshaven, his eyes gone somewhere far away and not yet come back. He looked at the woman and the child on his porch as if he could not quite make sense of them. "I'm not buying anything," he said. "I'm not selling," said Adeline. "I'm asking for work." Any work. My girl and I have been walking since morning, and Cypress Bend had no use for us. She lifted her chin. I'll clean, I'll cook, I'll mend. You don't have to keep me. Just the night. We'll be gone at first light if you want us gone. He almost said no. She saw it. And then, from somewhere behind him in the dark house, came a small sound. Not a cry, exactly, a child not crying, which is a worse sound, the sound of a child who has learned that crying does not bring anyone. Something crossed Nathaniel Roark's face. The kitchen's warm, he said finally. There's stew on the stove. Your girl looks froze through. He stepped back to let them pass. One night, what none of them knew, that cold October night, was that the walking was over. Adeline Shaw had knocked on the last door, and it was the right one. She fed Lucy and put her down on a pallet by the kitchen fire, and the child was asleep before the spoon left her hand. Then Adeline cleaned the kitchen, because it needed it, and because a body has to do something with its hands. And while she worked, she listened to the strange, sad house settle around her. Upstairs, the small sound came again. She found him by following it. A little boy in a big, cold bedroom, sitting up in the dark, his knees to his chest, his eyes open and dry and fixed on a music box that sat silent on the shelf across the room. He did not look at her when she came in. He did not do anything at all. "Hello," Adeline said softly. "You must be Jessie." "Nothing." She saw the music box. It was a fine thing, mother of pearl, the kind a man buys a wife he loves. She crossed the room and picked it up and turned the little key, and it made a sick, grinding sound and stopped. Broken, she turned it over in her hands, and she was a poor man's wife who had learned to fix what she could not replace, and she found the bent lever with her thumbnail and worked it gently back into place. She wound it again, and this time a thin, sweet, halting tune climbed out into the dark. An old lullaby, the kind grandmothers sing, and the little boy's head came up. Adeline did not know it was his mother's song. She only knew the tune, the way half the mothers in the country knew it, and so, very quietly, she began to sing the words. The boy began to shake, and then, for the first time since they had put his mother in the ground, Jessie Roark began to cry. Really cry, great heaving sobs. And Adeline set down the music box and gathered him up without asking permission, the way you gather up any grieving thing, and she held him and rocked him and let him soak her collar through while the little tune played itself out, and she sang it again, and again, until the crying wore down into hiccups, and the hiccups into breathing, and the breathing into sleep. When she looked up, Nathaniel Roark was standing in the doorway. He had heard the song. He had heard his son cry for the first time in a month. He stood there, holding the door frame like a man in a high wind, and the tears were running plain down his face, and he did not wipe them. Adeline eased the sleeping boy down onto his pillow. She stood, and she smoothed her apron, and she waited, expecting to be sent back down to the kitchen. "That was Isabel's song," Nathaniel said hoarsely. "My wife. She sang it to him. Every night." He looked at the sleeping child as if he were seeing a miracle and could not trust it. "He hasn't slept a whole night since she passed. He hasn't made a sound. He's sleeping now," Adeline said gently. Nathaniel Roark looked at this stranger in his dead wife's son's bedroom. This worn woman the whole town had turned away, and something in his ruined face broke open into something like hope. "Can you stay tonight?" he said. And then, because that was not really what he meant, he said it truer. "Can you stay? Not just tonight." "I can't," his voice failed him. "I don't know how to do the mornings anymore. Please, stay." Adeline Shaw thought of the road, and the cold, and the child asleep by the kitchen fire downstairs, and the last light burning in the last window in the county. "All right," she said. "We'll stay." They stayed, and the ranch began, very slowly, to come back to life. It came back the way a fire catches, small first, then sure. Adeline rose before dawn and had the coffee on when the hands came in. She opened windows that had been shut since the funeral, and the hill country air moved the curtains, and the house breathed for the first time in months. Every morning was the same, and Jessie came to depend on the sameness. Coffee, then the children, then the walk to the barn to see Estrella. Estrella was Isabel's mare, a gentle gray with a white star on her forehead, and she had grieved too, standing in the far corner of the corral with her head low. But the children loved her, and they climbed the rails to feed her handfuls of grass, and slowly the mare came back, to the fence, and then to the children, and then to Nathaniel's hand. Estrella, Lucy announced one morning, means star. Jessie told me. Adeline went still. Jessie told you? Lucy nodded, matter of fact, the way children hand you miracles. He whispers. He doesn't like grown-ups to hear. That was how it began. First to Lucy, in whispers. Then, one supper, a single word out loud asking for bread, and Nathaniel's fork stopped halfway to his mouth, and he did not dare speak for fear of frightening the moment away. The music box played every night now, and Adeline sang. And word by careful word the little boy came back from wherever grief had taken him. There was one afternoon it caught up with Adeline herself. She found a shirt of Thomas's at the bottom of the volleys, and the grief she had been too busy to feel took her legs. And she sat on the edge of the bed and shook. Little Lucy climbed up beside her without a word. Then, in the doorway, there was Jessie, and behind him Nathaniel, and none of them said anything, because some houses learn to hold grief together instead of alone. They went to church on Sundays now, all of them in the buckboard, and that was where the trouble started. A widowed rancher and a strange woman under his roof was, to the good people of Cypress Bend, a scandal too rich to leave alone. The whispers followed Adeline down the aisle, and across the churchyard, Gideon Marsh watched the Roark family with a still, cold, calculating look. For Marsh had reasons of his own for wanting no clever woman keeping house at that ranch. Reasons that had nothing to do with anybody's reputation. "They'll talk about you," Nathaniel said, low. "I'm sorry for it." "Let them talk," Adeline said. "The Lord knows what this house is, and so do I. That's two who matter more than all of Cypress Bend." The ranch books had not been touched since Isabel died. Nathaniel had no head for figures on a good day, and grief had made every day a bad one, and the ledgers had piled up on the desk in the office off the gallery, unopened, gathering dust and dread. But those neglected ledgers held a secret that had been waiting all autumn for someone patient enough to find it, and Adeline Shaw was nothing if not patient. She offered to set them right. She had kept Thomas's accounts, such as they were, and numbers steadied her. So in the evenings, after the children slept, she sat at the big desk with a lamp and worked back through a year of the Roark Ranch's business, line by patient line. It was late, and the house was quiet, and she was matching bills of sale against the ledger when a folded document slid out from between two pages. A contract, a sale of the water rights to Cypress Creek, the ranch's whole lifeblood, the reason the Roark cattle stayed fat while other men's died in the dry years. Sold, for a fraction of its worth, to the Marshland and Cattle Company. And there at the bottom, witnessing away the ranch's future in a fine flowing hand, was the signature of Isabel Roark. And then she saw the date, and something in the ledger made her set down the lamp and go very still. The contract was dated the 4th of September. Adeline had heard the whole sad story by now, from Tom's the old foreman, from the hands, from Nathaniel himself. Isabel Roark had been past speaking by the last week of August. By September, she could not lift her own head from the pillow, let alone sit at a desk and sign her name in that strong, sweeping hand. The woman who supposedly signed this contract had been 3 weeks from her grave and unable to hold a spoon. Adeline sat back slowly. Her heart was going hard. She rose and went upstairs, quiet as a thief. And from the shelf in Jessie's room, she took down the one thing in that house she knew carried Isabel Roark's true hand, the family Bible, with the births and the deaths written in the front, and beneath them, in Isabel's own careful script, the lullaby she had copied out for her son. She carried it down and laid it beside the contract in the lamplight, the true hand and the false one, side by side. They were not the same hand. They were not even close. Whoever had signed Isabel's name to that contract had never seen how the woman truly wrote. "Toms," Adeline said the next morning, drawing the old foreman aside by the corral, her voice low and even. The week Mrs. Roark passed. Could she have signed anything? Held a pen at all? The old man's face went dark and sad. "No, Siora. That last month she knew none of us. Not even the boy. She could not have signed her own name to save her life." He looked at her sharply. "Why do you ask me this?" "Because somebody signed it for her," said Adeline. "And I think they stole this ranch's water while a good man was too broke with grief to notice." Toms crossed himself, and by that same afternoon, word had traveled the way word does in hill country. And it reached Gideon Marsh that the drifter widow he had tried to run out of Cypress Bend was sitting at the Roark desk with her nose in the ledgers. Marsh did not wait. A clever woman in those books was the one thing in the world he could not allow. He would settle this the way he settled everything, in the open, in front of the whole town, where his word had always been law. He came on Sunday, after church, with half of Cypress Bend trailing behind him like it was a show. Gideon Marsh rode up the Roark Road with the preacher and the preacher's wife, and a dozen respectable citizens who had come to see the scandal put right. And he climbed down off his fine horse in the ranch yard, and he did not waste time. "Roark," he called, "you've let this go on long enough, and the town won't stand for it. This woman's got no business under your roof, and no business in your affairs. I've come to see her sent on her way, today, before she shames your poor wife's memory any further." Nathaniel came down off the gallery slow. Adeline stays. Gideon, does she? Marsh smiled and turned to work the crowd, because that was his gift. You all see it. A grieving man, not in his right mind, and a scheming woman worming her way into a rich ranch. Somebody's got to protect this family from itself. He spread his hands. "I'm only thinking of the boy." "That's a fine speech," said Adeline. She had come out onto the gallery. She had the contract in one hand and the Bible in the other, and she came down the steps into the yard, and the whole town turned to look at the drifter widow they had all agreed to despise. "Since you're all here," she said, and her voice did not shake, "you should see this too." She held up the contract. "This says Isabel Roark sold Cypress Creek to Mr. Marsh's company. Signed by her own hand. Dated the 4th of September. She let that sit. Mrs. Roark had not spoken a word nor lifted her head since the middle of August. Ask Toms. Ask the doctor. Ask anyone who sat with her. She could no more have signed this than she could have gotten up and danced. The yard had gone very quiet. And here," said Adeline, opening the Bible, holding it up beside the contract so the front row could see, "is how Isabel Roark truly wrote. In her own family Bible. In the lullaby she copied out for her son. She held the two hands together in the sunlight. Look at them. Go on, look." They looked. And a low sound went through the crowd. Because you did not have to be a lawyer to see it. The signatures were nothing alike. You forged a dead woman's name, Adeline said, and now she looked straight at Gideon Marsh to steal the water out from under her husband and her orphaned boy while they were too broken to stop you. That's the story I'm not telling, Mr. Marsh. That's the one you were so afraid I'd tell. Tom stepped forward beside her. It is true, the old man said to the whole town. Con mi vida, I swear it. She could not have signed. Gideon Marsh's face had gone the color of ash. He opened his mouth, and for once in his life the words would not arrange themselves, because the town he had ruled for 20 years was looking at him now with the beginnings of something he had never seen on their faces before. Not agreement. Understanding, the preacher took the contract from Adeline's hand and read it, and read the Bible and looked up at Marsh with a terrible sorrow. Gideon, he said quietly, what have you done? Marsh did not answer. There was no answer that would save him. He looked around the yard once, at all those faces turning away from him one by one, and he understood that the thing he had spent his whole life building, the deference, the fear, the certainty that his word was law, was gone, all of it, in the space of a single Sunday afternoon. He got back on his horse in silence. Nobody stopped him. Nobody had to. The judge in the county seat would undo the forged contract within the month. But the real judgment had already happened, right there in the ranch yard, in front of everyone whose respect he had ever wanted. He rode down the Roark Road and out of that country, and he did not come back. Nathaniel Roark let out a breath he seemed to have been holding since his wife died. He looked at Adeline holding the Bible, and there was something new standing up in his face, straight-backed and alive. You saved this place, he said. No, said Adeline. This place saved us. I only balanced the books. By the time the Bluebonnets came in the next spring, there was no house in the hill country happier than the Roark Ranch. The water ran clear and cold down Cypress Creek, and it belonged to the family again, free and clear. The cattle were fat. The yard was mended. The gate hung true on 2 good hinges, and the corral rails were sound. And the stone house above the creek was full, at last, of the only thing it had ever really needed, which was noise. Children's noise. Jessie and Lucy tore through it like a pair of colts, and Jessie talked now from sunup to sundown, as if making up for the silent month all at once. And some evenings you could not get the boy to hush for love or money, and his father would pretend to be stern about it and fail completely. They had married quietly in the little church at Cypress Bend, before the same town that had once whispered, and the whispering had turned to something else entirely. Because there is nothing a town loves like being able to tell itself it always knew. On the day of Jessie's 7th birthday, they set a long table out under the live oaks, and the neighbors came, and old Tom's played his fiddle, and Adeline wound the mother-of-pearl music box and set it on the windowsill, so its thin, sweet tune drifted out over the whole glad yard. Estrella grazed at the fence with 2 children on her back, and Isabel's boy laughed until he had to sit down. That evening, when the guests had gone and the children were asleep, Nathaniel found Adeline on the gallery, watching the last light go gold over the hills. I asked you to stay one night, he said. Do you remember? I remember. I didn't have any right to ask for more. He took her hand. I'm glad I did anyway. Adeline smiled and leaned her head against his shoulder, and neither of them said anything else. Because some things do not need saying twice. Sometimes the Lord sends us the very person we need most, disguised as someone who needs us just as badly. Sometimes the door we knock on out of pure desperation turns out to be the one door in all the world that was waiting to be opened. And sometimes a family is not the one we are born into. or even the one we plan, but the one that finds us on a cold road at dusk, with nothing left to lose, and takes us in. Have you ever found a family in a place you only came to for shelter? If this story warmed something in you tonight, stay a while with us here at Front Porch Tales. Leave a comment and tell us where in the world you are watching from. Subscribe so the next story finds its way to your door, and share this one with someone who once opened their home to a stranger, or wishes someone had opened one to them. Thank you for sitting with us. There is another fire lit, and another story waiting, and the same good women of Cypress Bend who had once looked away when Adeline Shaw passed, now saved her a place in the front pew every Sunday, and called her by her name, and greeted her children by theirs, and never once let on that things had ever been any other way at all.